Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for joining us on another awesome Sunday morning. Yo, we moving into the summer. And for those of us here in hot Atlanta, that means that we won't be seeing another cold spurt for at least another 6 to 7 months at least. This winter here, it's interesting because one of the things in Atlanta about the weather is that as you're kind of going through what is considered quote unquote the winter time, like once it's over with, you forget about that part. It's like, I don't even remember when it was cold. I know we had a couple of cold days, but I don't remember. It's not like growing up in the Northeast like I grew. You remember winters. Down here, you don't remember winters. The only season that I remember and recall all the time is, and we were just in that period, and we're not in that period so much. There's two periods in Atlanta where when you come outside, it's like 30 and you're dressed for 30. And then when you come back outside for lunch, it's like 80. So you got to take off everything until it gets late at night in the year. And so it's probably about a 3 or 4 week span that happens. It's always an interesting time. But man, I just love this time of the year. I love having this conversation as we continue to close in on Father's Day this year. It's always an exciting time for me to talk to good brothers like this brother today. He is Kenneth Reddick III, a 3-time suicide survivor, former 30-year alcoholic, and now a powerful mental health advocate, speaker, and certified peer specialist. Kenneth's journey from deep personal struggle to purpose-driven healing is both courageous and transformative. For over 2 decades in the pharmaceutical industry, including 14 years in neuroscience and mental health, Kenneth brings both a clinical understanding and lived experience to the table. Now, for over 3 years, he is the founder of the Brothers Brunch Foundation, a not-for-profit dedicated to creating healing spaces for Black men to come together, speak truth, and reclaim their emotional well-being. Through events like Brothers Brunch, Men's Holiday Relaxation, and TNT Tuesday Talks, Kenneth is reshaping how we think about vulnerability, mental health, and brotherhood. Today, we dive into his journey and the work of healing and how fatherhood and community are central to building lives. Let's bring Brother Kenneth to the stage. How you doing, sir?
Hey, amazingly blessed and unbothered, my brother. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Ain't no other way to be, right? Ain't no other way to be.
I know that's right. Yes, sir.
So listen, we start our podcast off, by, engaging in a simple conversation that is your truth. You could tell your truth how you want to tell it. You could tell it from the vantage point of you being a dad, or from the vantage point of your father's situation, or you could tell it from both. And it's simply tell us your daddy story.
Okay. Hey, well, my daddy story starts with, first of all, I have a great and amazing father. He's actually the COO of the Brothers Brunch Foundation. And, as my dad, as I follow him and watched him as my son watches me now, I'm glad to be present for my son the way that my father was there for me and still is. I always thought that my dad would actually be leading what I'm doing now. I always said, I hope when he retired, he runs around the community just like I do, trying to help everybody and be a part. And I said, you know what? I hope when my dad retires that he has a nonprofit to actually do this work. And I never thought it would be manifested through me. So, and I am a father. I have 4 total, 2 biological, and 2, as I say, bonus kids. And I will say that my journey as a father is a lot different with my youngest, that's 8 years old now, since I've come through my addiction and has taken care of my mental health.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. But before we do that, I want to share with you I love when I hear this narrative. You know, I've now done this for 4 years, so I hear all kinds of daddy stories. You know, in my work over 20 years, I've heard all kinds of daddy stories.
Mhm.
But the daddy stories that always warm my heart is when people start off like you started off, which is I had an amazing dad.
Mhm.
Like that, I have a friend of mine who's in the work, and some years ago back, we used to travel around the country speaking, and you know we would speak and do presentations together, and everybody with that negative daddy story would get up and tell their negative story, and
Mhm.
he would always get up and he would feel a funny kind of way. And one day we were talking on the side, and he said, man, I got to figure out how to resonate with this crowd because I really don't have that narrative, that fatherless narrative, right? And I said, yo, I said, what are you talking about? He said, you know, all of you. I said, dude, I said, the fatherful narrative is equally, if not more important than the fatherless narrative.
Mhm.
And the reason that the fatherful narrative is so critical is because I need to hear the fatherful narrative. It is in your story that gives me some sense what the beauty of fatherhood looks like when we're all fully engaged. That's inspirational. That is inspiring. And that story needs to be elevated higher than the fatherless story. We can all talk about pain because pain is pain, right?
Exactly.
You're in the mental health space, and we don't distinguish what pain puts us in a particular
No,
mental health space.
no.
But the healthy space when it comes to the father fullness and
Mhm.
talking about that thing, like when you talk to, and I'm going to ask you this question, and it's a crazy question, but it's a relative and relevant question. And that is like, if you ask me the question, it's a no brainer because I had no other choice. But when I ask brothers in that space like you, can you imagine your dad not being around?
Hmm. Yeah, that ain't no crazy question. That's a real question because even to this day, with him being around at 79 and being present, I still can't imagine him not
Mm,
being here. But that's a great question because I have a 25-year-old daughter.
mm,
And one of the things that I had to come to reality with her just a couple of months ago, having dinner, was I had to tell her, I know I was there, but I wasn't present.
mm, mm,
So, yeah, that is an interesting narrative because even though we are doing the work or we think that we're present, sometimes we're just there. But the reality is that with my dad, he was present and I still couldn't imagine him to this day not being here. And I'm glad you mentioned that about it because a lot of people always ask me, like, when they hear my journey, they say, well, what was your childhood like? Like they
mm,
expect it to be so bad. And I'm like, no, I had it very good. I mean,
mhm,
I had both sets of grandparents, grandfathers. My grandfather picked me up every day from school from
mm,
kindergarten all the way up through high school.
mm,
So I've always had a dad and a presence in my life. But the thing about it is, even as a dad, no matter how good it can be from a child's perspective or that dad himself, we all still have challenges. And
mm,
that's where this whole mental health narrative, the way I present it is, it's not about necessarily the mental health challenges, but our mental health fitness. And
mm,
that's where we miss it. That's
mm,
where even, and I'm about to tell you a question that was asked of me one time was, what could my dad have done differently? This was on one of my men's calls with my dad being on there. And the
mhm,
only thing I could say was, you know what? The only thing my parents could have done was maybe gotten me proactively in therapy. That's the only thing I think of that my dad could have done truly differently, because even though he's a great dad, as a dad, we still don't see everything that we need to with and for our kids.
mm. Talk to me a little bit about your journey into this work because oftentimes people try to mirror the academic journey because they believe we went to school for this, right? And we did go to school. We just didn't go to traditional school. We went to the school of life,
Life,
right?
vice
Life
versa.
has
Yes, sir.
positioned us in the space that we're in.
Yes.
And so, talk about your journey and what led you into this specific work.
Well, as you mentioned, I was a pharmaceutical sales representative, and so I was very familiar with the mental health space. But it was in college, even though I was the most popular, King Orange Green at Florida A&M University, I
Mm-hmm.
still had my first attempt on my life at the end of my freshman year. I didn't identify, of course, I'm a black man. Ain't nothing wrong with me. I was drinking. I just had too much to drink.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then we move on, and then we have some legal challenges, several. We have some driving situations, a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, 3 years ago, when I went out on my last binge, I ended up in an inpatient facility. But before I ended up in that inpatient facility, I ended up sitting next to my old liquor store, next to a homeless guy, drinking my
Mm-hmm.
liquor with my backpack, looking at him, but he had some choice words for me.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality was I had just built a brand new house, just got promoted to executive sales rep, platinum performer, but I was sitting there. And people always wonder about what a bottom looks like. And sometimes we can't imagine it. So I got a call from my psychiatrist, whom we all know. But I said, who called you? She said, well, you had an appointment with me this morning, and I was calling you like I said I would. And you know what I told her at that point? I said, I've been out for 3 days. I think it's time for me to get some help.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went into detox for 3 days and came out, for me, that's when my testimony started because the taste was truly removed from my tongue. So when people ask me about my journey and how I did it, mine was truly a miraculous situation to put me in the position that I'm in to know that, you know what, my steps are ordered from this day forward based on my testimony.
What's the difference? It's crazy, kind of, because just before I got on to this, I was on my phone doing something, and you know how when you're scrolling, sometimes things just pop up.
Hmm.
And one of the things that popped up was a scene from a movie
Hmm.
with Richard Pryor.
Hmm.
And I hadn't seen this movie in a while, but I stopped to listen to his dialogue because I just love Richard Pryor. I mean, as
Oh yeah, classic.
funny as he was, the life experience. You talk about someone who lived a life experience that became the wisdom of who he was, and the core of why he was funny in the space that he was funny is. It's a master class. His life is a master class, like many of our lives. But the movie was Which Way Is Up? And it's the end of the scene, and he's talking to the guy in the car about him stepping away from him having control over his life.
Hmm.
And one of the things he said in there, he says, I'm at the bottom.
Hmm.
And right now, there's only one way to go, and that's up.
Yes.
Right? And what you
Yes.
just said was that. Like, what is the turning point? Like, what is the thing for you that was the recognition of the bottom, and then the forward thinking that I'm not going to stay here. I'm only going to go the only way that I can go right now, and that's up.
Well, like I say, my bottom is the reality of sitting there next to the guy that I used to look at and wonder how he got there.
Mm,
I mean, just imagine people walking up looking at you, and you know how you look at others and say, I wonder how they got there.
mm-hmm,
I realized how I got there, and I realized where I didn't want to be any longer. A little bit of insight on that. My last binge was 2 days after, well, one day after my son's 5th birthday. So when I think about that turning point, I think about him. I
mm-hmm,
think about my dad being present. I think about not being there for him. But then along my healing journey, I said, Scooter, it's not just about him.
mm,
And that's where I look at me and my daughter now and the relationship that we have been able to build through my sobriety that we didn't have before. So I was at the bottom because I was right there,
mm,
and I had a choice to make. And fortunately, I had a couple people that were around me, people that were praying for me, that I finally started to listen. One of the things I say is we always say mind, body, spirit. Why do we put the spirit last? Spirit, mind, body. I'm no
Right.
longer in control. My steps are ordered. That's
Mhm.
one thing that I learned from my dad. And one thing my dad always said was, Scooter, pray for the taste to be removed from your tongue. I don't think if I would have sat there next to that homeless guy on that same stoop that I used to watch him on, I don't think I would have realized that I was spiraling to my bottom. But like Richard Pryor said, it was only up from there.
Yeah.
Got a detox.
When I love the fact that, he never gave up on you.
Mhm.
Like, that's when we talk about that praying grandmother, that praying
Yes.
grandfather, or praying grandparent, when they're in a space where they don't know what else to do but pray,
Hmm.
right? But isn't an option for them to lean on. Um, when you were in those moments, was it something more that you were running to, or something that you was running from?
I would say running from, because one of the things that I realized, and we can go back to childhood on this one, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times we think that those adverse childhood experiences has to be something that's so traumatic. You
Mm,
had to have gotten beaten up, possibly molested, or those sorts of things. But for me, I was a little smart guy. So when I
mm,
didn't get picked by my friends starting in kindergarten and through elementary school, because I was a year ahead, so I was smart now, and I used to run. I used to literally run and hide behind the bleachers just because my little emotions, and then when I got called out of my name by certain other cultures, in middle school, I never realized until last year, honestly, how much that impacted my whole mental well-being. So
mm-hmm.
throughout all my life, I was always trying to figure out how could Scooter fit in and be a big boy. And that's when I first stepped foot on campus in college. And that's when the drinking started. And I never realized how much I was running to the alcohol just to fit in. So it
Wow.
definitely was something that I was running from, but trying to run to acceptance. And I didn't realize until my accountability partner sent this to me over the past year that there was actually a thing called approval addiction.
Mm,
So I would say for those all my life, I suffer from approval addiction and never realized it, which brings about low self-esteem because you always want to be accepted. You don't want to hurt anybody. I still sometimes have a problem with saying my bad. I'm sorry. People are like, what you saying that for? It's, but I'm well enough to where I tell people I may get down now, but I don't get stuck. Because it's okay to be down. It's okay
mm-hmm.
to have a little bit of anxiety. As I've taken care of my mental health, I'm able to protect that more. But
Mm,
if we don't take care of our mental health, a lot of times we're always seeking some type of approval or something.
mm-hmm. That's the mental health space that we're in. First of all, it's a stigmatism for most men in general, but for Black men specifically, right?
Yes.
And so, where the last thing we want anybody working on is our mind. Right, we don't want anybody tinkering in our brain. And
And that should be the first.
that should be the first thing you're doing.
Right, right.
When did that come to a space where you really, because I love the fact that you said the one thing that your father could have done for you is to be more intentional about getting you, some mental health assistance. Like, how did you embrace that, and how should men think about, and at what point in their lives should they really be thinking about that, as opposed to waiting till crisis?
Let me tell you something. Mental health should be treated just like your physical health, or better yet, just like your car. Because we
Mm,
treat our vehicles better than we do our mental health. When do you start? I tell men, families, when your child gets into school, your child should have a therapist.
mm,
That's their mental health coach. That's your coach for your child because we are generations removed. So it has to start at an early age so that we can help guide them and not project our traumas onto them. And I always talk about benefits. We got benefits at work, our insurance. Why do we use benefits in our insurance like car insurance only for emergencies? They're all for maintenance. Benefits are to get us ahead. So
Right.
therapy should be used all the time. Here's my saying on that. Therapy is therapeutic, not problematic. We all need someone to talk with. I say at least once a month with a non-emotional, non-judgmental connection to actually debrief on life.
Mhm.
So we have to shift the narrative of what we think therapy is. I don't care if I ask men, if I ask kids. I did a presentation to third graders the other day, and I say, what is mental health? What is therapy? Oh, when you have a problem and you need to talk. No, no, it's not. Physical therapy is not just for problems. Physical
Mhm.
therapy is to go get your body stretched out so that you can release the tension points, just like chiropractor or anything else. So we should all be doing our diligence to take care of our minds so that when we come to those bumps in the road of life, then we're not thrown off the road. We can just maybe repair that tire. I would say when I went to outpatient the last time, because I just felt as though I need to get my transmission flushed and my spark plugs changed.
Okay.
That's the way I
Yeah.
look at it. It
Mhm.
wasn't that I was this, hey, if I don't get those tools necessary for my mind, I may end up being stuck in depression or anxiety. These
Mhm.
are tools for our well-being, not for our fixing.
Now you founded Brothers Brunch Foundation, I'm sure, to structuralize everything you're talking about now. Trying to
Yes.
figure out, how do I do this at scale? How do I do this for more people? How do I
Mhm.
extend myself and be a benefit to more brothers out there who need this? And also um, to build community, right? Because that's important for us, right? Building community, which is why I always tell folks, like, especially when it comes, don't want to be me. Stop trying to be me. Like, I'm charged with building my community.
Thank
And you can't ask me how to build my community. You have to go and build your own community. And your
you. Yeah,
community may not look like mine. We may not be resourced the same. We may not be visioned the same. People
correct.
may see us the same, but we're not the same.
But
The
not.
sheep hear the voice of their shepherd. Like the brothers that are listening to you because your voice is the voice that resonates. They may not listen to Kenny Braswell. They may not listen to X person. They may not listen to Y person. Talk to
Mhm.
me about why it was important to create the foundation.
Well, it's funny how the foundation came up because I initially had a T-shirt line called Amazingly Blessed Apparel, and I
Okay.
was going to donate money to mental health. And I was supporting a ladies organization, and I was like, I was in an activity with them, and I was the only man, and I was like, you know
Mhm,
what? I think I need to do this for men because
mhm,
I don't even know if it looked appropriately that I was just the only man with the ladies.
mhm,
So, but that's also listening to my spirit and my guidance of what my place is. So
mhm,
I came up with the Brothers Brunch Foundation, not a time to eat, but be fed mental health and self-care awareness. Because everybody hears Brothers Brunch and think about, oh, okay, we're going to eat this or that. We have food, but we getting fed.
mhm,
When I'm out in the street ministry, stopping in the barber shops, feeding brothers with my testimony, but also feeding them with the tools and resources. This ministry is different, and I call it a ministry because I know that it's spiritually led by me. And I love what you said about everybody's journey, everybody's package holistically is different.
right.
Um, One of the things with the Brothers Brunch Foundation, though, is that I was like, you know what? My passion is not just about getting men together, but how do we truly get them kickstarted on a new mental health and self-care journey? Because
Mhm,
I was alone. I had support, but I didn't have anybody that truly understood me. And that's where being a peer, like you said, hey, Kenneth Braswell's journey and healing journey is totally different than Kenneth Sober Scooter Reddick's journey and healing journey. And
mhm,
that's what we have to respect also in these spaces is understanding what the individual needs. And so we have an individual approach of connecting with the men. And one of the things I've started to say is we're beyond the testimony and beyond the fellowship. I mean, just this week, a homeless guy went into recovery, based on me stopping. And it was another brother that happened to be with me. And the funny part about this, Kenneth, is I was supposed to have a meeting that night and I shut it down because after 15 minutes, nobody was on there. But then a couple people did try to join. But those are the things that when you talk about comparing yourself to others, some people are looking at how we can fill up a room. Some people are looking at how we can truly help. And if I wouldn't have shut down that meeting and went to where I went that night, that homeless guy would not be in recovery today. My spirit leads and guides a little bit differently than many in this space. So I'm glad that you mentioned about that because, hey, it's all about getting the people the support that they need. And that's why I'm now a mental health peer coach, because I truly want to be out there helping the peers.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because one of my drivers has always been to be available for people when they're in the most need.
Yes.
So the infrastructure of what you're building is what does that, right? It allows you to
Yes.
be available because you never know when somebody's going to need you,
Exactly.
right? And so we think that people only need us when we open up the doors, right? When we open
Mhm.
up the doors of the church, like
Right.
people need
Right.
you.
Yeah.
Their needs don't move on your schedule,
No.
right?
No.
And so but you have to be available. It was kind of one of the things that I'm very blessed and proud of with respect to our organization, and that is we have weathered like storms that have taken out a lot of people,
Hmm.
whether it was sequestration, whether it was the changing of administrations and budget cuts, whether if it was what's happening right now with DEI and cancellation
Yes.
and all those things, and COVID, right, which was the big
Yes.
dog in
Yes.
knocking people out. And we have grown every time there's been a challenge. We've
That's
gotten
right.
bigger every time there's been a challenge. But it was during those times when we got the most people coming through our doors
Hmm.
because they were looking for someone and we had to be available. And what I always think about is what if I wasn't there? Like when you talk about that homeless guy
Hmm.
and you run into him, you got to think about in your mind, Scoot, it's like, damn, thank you, Lord, for putting me in
Yes.
position to be a help to someone that I didn't even know needed help. But thank God I was there because I don't want to have to think about what would have happened to him if I wasn't.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's, and first of all, I applaud you all because I know that you all just had the 100 men, the 100 fathers that graduated. And that
Hmm.
and that is truly amazing. And that's meeting them where they are.
Hmm.
So many times we want everything to be structured around what we're doing. And we can even bring this full circle back to specifically dads.
Hmm.
When do we often meet our kids where they are versus trying to build them in what we want them to be? And
Hmm.
that's emotional damage as well. And we don't realize that. That's why my principles of Brothers Brunch Foundation, PCP, positive, consistent, and present. Like you say, if we're not, we can speak positive all we want to, but if
Right.
we're not consistent with our actions and also assisting others, we lose presence to ourselves, first of all, but then we lose presence to others. And I lost presence for a long time to my family and my community. And that's the
Hmm.
thing that I realize is that it's not about me talking about what all I did. It's about going out there and finding the people that we can support to get to where I am.
Hmm.
And it's not, and for me, a lot of people know that I'm kind of when I say I meet the people where they are, it could be dress,
Mm.
we talk, it could do whatever. I joke around with people sometimes. I say, yeah, I just got me a grill at the bottom, but it has my sobriety date on it. Just so when I'm out there sometimes with these young men, they like, boy, you got a grill? Yeah. Guess why? Because of my sobriety date. Oh, for real? Tell me more about that. But that's
Mm.
the thing is sometimes we don't want to meet people where they are. We think because we've gotten to a certain point, just like that homeless guy. I bet it was probably at least 10, 20 people that just walked by him.
Mm.
Somebody may have given him a little change, but who gave him a conversation?
Right.
Who asked if he was safe? Who
Mm-hmm.
asked what all is going on? And I didn't get him right at that moment. I left. I said, "Are you okay for the night?" I said, "Okay, I'm gonna call you in the morning." Because sometimes, when you've been on the journey, you have a decent sense of when people are truly at harm, especially for harming themselves. And that's why I say sometimes having someone with that non-emotional connection helps, that
Mm.
understands, because sometimes when we care about people, we can be too pushy and it triggers them.
Mm.
And that's what we don't want to do. So that's
Right.
where that genuine support and concern and understanding the journey, and like you said, being present, that makes the difference, because that man wasn't going to come to my Tuesday night talks.
Right.
The brothers in the barbershop, a lot of times, they may not get on the Zoom call, you know. So that's where I'm even reevaluating with Brothers Brunch Foundation. How many events do I have versus how many pop-ups do I have?
Mm.
Because we focus a lot on events. Just being honest, everybody does, because we want to have an event. We want to have a certain day to try to bring people out. We want to do so many this. We want to do so many that. But are we getting the people that are supporting us? Or are
Mm-hmm.
we truly getting sometimes the people that need the support? And like you say, there are organizations at different levels that draw people, different ways, and that's fine. But I know how I'm led. And I
Mm-hmm.
know what the work that Brothers Brunch Foundation is doing with getting men into therapy, getting men into, and I'm going to interrupt myself right there, because I had to realize I have a reaffirmation group, and
Okay.
and I have an affirmation group.
Mm.
So the reaffirmation might be brothers like us that just sitting having a conversation. We just need to hear and know, okay, well, look, a little strengthening. But that homeless guy, and the other guy that just finished a recovery program that Brothers Brunch Foundation paid for, for those guys that we pay for therapy when we have the funding, those are the guys that were like me, that needed that affirmation. I thought
Mm.
I was at a reaffirmation phase, but being an alcoholic and bipolar depressed, now I truly needed more affirmation than
Right.
just reaffirmation. But
Mm-hmm.
that's that first step of coming to believe that I had a problem. And also, if we want to bring in an AA step, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
Mm. Right. But that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is we always want to put spirituality on the back when it needs to be in the front, because the spirit knows.
Exactly. And then that eases our mind. How many times are we, trying to figure everything out ourselves? And I'm not talking about you. And you mentioned the church earlier. So I become more spiritual on my new journey versus churchy, because I
Right.
have to understand that I have to listen to the spirit for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the message doesn't come from anyone else. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I do my meditation, I do my yoga, I do whatever I need so that I can be peaceful. Sometimes, even when I'm writing my book, I go out, I take a hike. I may walk out into the lake and sit on a rock. One time
Mm.
I went out there, I lifted my head up after meditation. It was a snake on the other rock right next to me.
Wow.
But I received so much, and those are the things that we don't do, is we don't do enough self-care. That's why I had to put on their mental health and self-care, because
Mm-hmm.
when we do the work for the self-care, that helps our mental. But we
Mm-hmm.
weren't taught that. We were
Mm-hmm.
taught, don't cry, be tough, push through it. And especially as a dad with our kids, especially our boys, man up, toughen up, this or that or whatever. And that's why we're damaged now.
Yeah.
We have to take a different approach, not only for ourselves, but for our families and our kids. Because if we don't, we're gonna have another birthing of an unhealed generation.
Yeah. You do something that's non-traditional, because most men who think about self-health, the first thing they will say is, I need to go to the gym. I
Right,
need to go to the court.
right.
But I was looking at some of the pictures on your website, and you actually do something that the next time you do it, you got to holler at me, because it's one of my self-help things, and that's going to the spa.
Okay.
Like
Let's do
I
it.
I go get my feet done, I get my hands done. Haven't done this massage in a while, but I need to go and do it. But I've also kind of instilled that it's one of my things that I do specifically with my girls, right? Which is, hey, let's go to the spot, get our feet done. And it's an intimate space because it is self-care, but it is also a time of bonding where we sit there and we just like chat, right?
Yes.
With
Yes.
no agenda. It's just we're spending time with each other,
It's
right? And
awesome.
so tell me about how men take that on, because I know when I mention it to some of my boys, they're like, what, you mean together? We going together? It's like, yeah, man, like
Yeah.
what you think is gonna happen?
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you saw the picture. Actually, I take my 8-year-old son.
Mhm.
He goes and get his toes. So I'm starting early.
Okay.
And that's one thing. Even like I said with that therapy before, we got to start early. Not that it's too late, but for those dads that have those young ones, start doing it now so it won't be perceived a certain way. But sometimes it's the way I do it is because I've had men at spa days where they go to the salt cave, they do the oxygen bar, the foot detoxes. Shoot, some of the men have even gotten the lingam steam. I don't know. Are you familiar with the lingam steam?
Oh, what's that?
The lingam steam is the men's herbal steaming of the prostate, just
Okay.
like the women's V steam.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm telling you, you'd be surprised at some of the guys that have come in to try it and they loved it. And those are the things that we have alienated ourselves from just because of different stigmas, just because we think it's not tough. So the best way to do it is just bring them.
Mm.
Just bring them. I mean, I've had with my spa days, I've had you know as young as 15 participate. All of the ones that have come out that have been like late teens, early 20s. you know some of them stick with me just because of that, because Aunt done showed them a little something different. And so those are the things that we have to continue to embrace. What
Mhm.
one thing I say that I do is I give myself at least a woosah moment every week. I mean,
Mhm.
I've gone to get a massage. I'm on that snoring. I go to a physical therapist, total body recovery stretch.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't realize that when we look at our insurance, and I had to take a step back and someone say, Scooter, everybody ain't had insurance like you got, but
Mhm.
it's always worth to look into. Your
Mhm.
physical therapy visits can cover massage, even if it's at a percentage, chiropractor, acupuncture, and just physical therapy visits for maintenance. That's what
Mhm.
I say. There's so many tools and resources out here, and it's not just for us, it's for our families.
Right.
And the only way to do it is truly to expose them and just say, come on, let's just go try it, you know,
Right.
and let's do something different. Because what we don't realize is those things are when we're truly present for our kids. What we tend to do is we think because we run them around the practice, because we take them, we get them up, take them, we do the home, we do this. Oh, I'm there. Those are things that I know some people did not have it, but those are the things, honestly, that we supposed to do. you
Mm.
know. So I have to do things like take my son. He's been to the salt cave. He's gotten the feet done. We do things. I go in. Even part of my self-care now is going and sitting him, watching him play a video game and
Mm.
engaging him.
Mhm.
And that's what we have to do. When we start engaging them more in things that they love to do, then they're open to trying more things that we want them to do.
Mhm.
And we have to be cognizant of that, because a lot of times, even if it's sports or different things, is that what they truly want to do? Or is that what we're pushing them to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I always say this and I confuse people when I say it until I explain it. And it is, there's a difference between being with your kids and being with your kids, right? So
That's
what you were
good.
just describing, which is you could take your kids to sports practice and be with your kids,
Hmm.
but playing a video game and being with your child is different.
It's very different. Yes, yes. I love the way you put that. That is very different. And I think that's a key part to fatherhood that many fathers don't get, but I think we can. I just started a program at my son's school called Dad's Opening Doors.
Okay.
Now we have 50 plus dads signed up. We've gone from 8 dads opening doors first of the month in January to the last one we had. There were 15 dads on the first Monday for kids coming to GMAS, of dads out there opening the doors for their kids. You know, we have dads that are now, I mean, they want to do CPR and swimming during the summer. You know, we might do a vision board. Those are the things though. But if I didn't have my journey and if I didn't learn through my lived experiences and is learning how to be present for my son, I wouldn't have that gift to give the other fathers so that we can all be more present for our kids. So it's a process. But if we don't speak up and talk about it and everybody keeps doing the same routine, it's not only impacting our well-being, but it's definitely impacting our kids.
What's the biggest struggle you're seeing with your fathers right now? Because it ebbs and flows, you know, depending on what's happening in the world at the moment. But I'm curious to know, with the fathers that are coming into your space, what tends to be their biggest issue or challenge?
There's so much going in the world right now that's just
Right.
coming down on everybody. I would say time. I think fathers do want to do more, but with the pressures of being stretched, a lot of them feel as though I just don't have the time. One of the things that I talk to a lot of fathers about is too, a lot of it is a mental challenge. A lot of it is, one of the things I always say is, let's think about it as a shift versus a change. I think even when we present the father, sometimes it's like, well, hey, if you just change this, that's so tense. You know, fathers are so stressed until they don't feel as though they can make changes. But if we change the verbiage and let them know, I know change can be a little tough, but let's just figure a couple of things we might be able to just shift. You know, it even sounds better. I think the pressures of the world, you know, if it's jobs, like you say, things started at COVID, seemed like it started to get a little bit better. Everything was getting a little, you know, a little bit better for everybody. And now all of a sudden, especially for Black fathers, you know, it's like they're lost.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is, and I'm glad you framed it, because now you're helping me kind of think a little bit about my narrative as well when it comes to working with our dads. And it's not so much the one-offs right now. It's not just child support. It's not just drama. It's not just this. It's not just that. It's the multiplicity of everything that is coming in and trying to navigate those challenges and still be stable in the lives of your children. And that in and of itself is what messes with time.
It does. It does. And the thing about, and I'm glad you said that too, because it brought me to another thing I say is, we have to look at every approach holistically, and that's with a W. That's why I don't just, even though we focus on mental health and self-care, I have to make sure that if someone needs a job, I have a resource to help them, because that's going to impact their mental health of them having a job or even getting on that progress of the journey of having a job. If a person doesn't have housing, you know, just like the guy I just helped, you know, I'm not just getting him into the recovery center. We have to make sure, and he has older kids, he's an older guy, but, you know, I have to look at not just his mental health or his addiction. I have to look at his housing. I have to look at, okay, how can we help him possibly mend, or how can we support? I don't like to use that word help a lot, because I think for me, help means that somebody has the answer to it, or that something is so damaging, but sometimes we just need some support. So I have to look at everything holistically, because like you said, we can't pinpoint it anymore. and no one man has just one challenge.
Right.
And we can't look at it that way. And we can't think that, okay, I get him a job, he gonna be all right. No, I can get him a job. That's the first step to get to the next step of him truly healing.
Yeah, the distinguishment in the work is something that you described before, and you're describing it now, and it's the difference between deepening and broadening, right? And
Mm,
so when you talked earlier about events, events are broadening. They get you
yes.
to more people, they get you exposed, they get
Mhm,
you seen around more people. But deepening
mhm.
is taking what you have and going in so that what you're providing is sustaining
When
and
I tell you
supporting.
what you just said is affirmation, I just had a gentleman the other day, a brother that's in the space, and he actually said, "Don't go wide, go deep."
So deep.
And so that's an affirmation for me, because that's something that, the work that I do, I have been being stretched.
Mm-hmm.
Either if it's people that want me to be present because of my testimony and share and those sorts of things. And but I've realized, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning too. It was like, hey, I'm realizing, Scooter, you have a street ministry. It's meant for me to be going knocking on doors and seeing who needs help,
Mm-hmm.
not trying to see who all's gonna come. I'm not the church.
Mm-hmm. What's your affirmation? Because 3-time suicide survivor, which means 3 times you thought that it was better for you not to be here than to be here.
Mhm.
How do you inspire and affirm yourself to not ever make a fourth?
Hmm. My purpose is my peace.
Hmm.
I can't say it any better than that. Um, I truly found my purpose.
Okay.
A lot of times, and this can go for me and others too, just as in something to think about. When I came out of detox, I had a gentleman ask me, one of my good friends, he said, "Scooter, what are you seeking? You have XYZ. What are you seeking?" That's when I had to understand that I was seeking the world and not my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say my purpose is my peace, because when we truly, and I keep getting back to the spirit, mind, body, get out of our heads
Mm-hmm.
and understand. And I can say, like you mentioned, even in this space, some people may try to go after certain things that's not really aligned with their purpose. I see some people that are very influential that sometimes say, "Hey, if you haven't been through certain lived experiences, you know, sometimes we just have to just not say anything."
Mm.
And I've learned my space, and I'm very comfortable with that. And no weapon formed against me shall prosper, because I know as long as I'm walking in my purpose, I might get. I tell people, I say, you might throw me off for a moment, but you're not going to disrupt my peace.
Mm. What advice would you give to a father who is silently, right, struggling with depression, addiction, or shame? What would you tell him?
Show up. Show up somewhere. I think a lot of times we need to hear someone. And I say that because I do have individuals that are still sometimes like, no, I don't want to get involved on the call. I don't really want to, it's not the right time. I just say whatever you can do to surround yourself in settings consistently. One of the things myself I have to do is, my life is bigger than Brothers Brunch, because I show up in many spaces. I probably in 2 or 3 conversations virtually alive a week,
Mm-hmm.
because I have to be there. I have to continue to hear what's going on so that I can continue to heal. Don't be embarrassed. Understand, I know it's cliche, but you are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, I just felt like I was the only one that was truly going through. We have to get the help that we need. It's not easy. I sit up here and I say it, but in my heart, I understand that it's their individual journey.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what I say, because no matter what anybody said, I mean, being a rep and having DUIs and stuff, anybody would think like, you know, you got a good job, you making six figures. Why don't you just stop drinking? What I
Can't,
tell people
can't
is when you
get right.
hey,
Get right.
when you're suffering from mental illness and addiction, I have to tell so many people that want to support people, it's not much you can do. Let them
Mm-hmm.
know you're there. Offer them hope.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say anything that'll trigger. I think sometimes it's not even as much of me talking to the person about what's needed, but talking to the people that want to support,
Mm-hmm.
because the people that love you the most are your biggest triggers.
The thing when you said that, if I could, I want to build on what you said because you said show up.
Hmm.
And if I was going to use some words, I personally would not use the word show up because for men, when they're told to show up, it means they have to do something.
Hmm.
And that's why most men don't show up. Because if I show up, you want me to do something. That's the only reason you want me to show up, because you want me to do something.
I get it.
But what I would say is be seen. Be
Mhm.
seen, right? Because our natural inclination is to hide. It's the very first question God ever asked man.
Mhm.
Where are you?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was because Adam felt like if he showed up that God wanted him to do something, but God was saying, I don't need you to show up to do anything, but what I do need to know is why are you hiding?
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
You need to know that, right?
Yeah.
And so to be seen is to just come forward so that people can see you. Because this
Mhm.
is where I'm leading in with this, and I want to ask you this question for brothers and sisters who unfortunately are successful at suicide.
Mhm.
What I know about grieving families is that they are almost always in disbelief because they never saw it coming.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
wonder if they don't see it coming because of the hiddenness of what the individual is doing, meaning they were hiding from people as
Right.
opposed to being seen by people, not just on demand, showing up for people who wanted them to show up because they
Yeah.
needed something and being seen. What's the indicator, if there is any indicator? And I know it's very difficult to see that in someone, but there has to be some indicators that would tell someone to be mindful of someone who might be have the propensity to think suicide.
Yeah, and there are some indicators, and I want to say one thing to what you just said. Thank you. The show up can come across, the wrong way. I think me being a peer, I think of it from me having the discussion versus someone else. So we do need to be sensitive to that. I think that being seen and being present,
Right,
and understanding that, what, it's not necessarily about you being there for everybody else, but being there for self,
right.
just for understanding.
Hmm.
Um, some of the signs, I mean, could be, isolation, depression. If you notice somebody that's, I mean, I would, just being honest with you, I'd be in the bed for 3, 4 days,
Wow.
sometimes not bathed for a couple of days, but one of the things I will say is asking someone if they're thinking about harming themselves is better than not asking. A lot of times we think that that may be more triggering, but sometimes that could just let someone like myself know that, okay, someone does care.
Hmm.
So if they're silent, don't say too much, but then don't be too silent either. I've
Right.
I've only had one person to actually tell me that, Scooter, this time I think you actually would hurt yourself.
Hmm.
Only one person out of those times and out of all the years of struggling. So understand,
What was the characteristic that that person had that others did not?
I think they really understood me and I shared a lot with them.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I honestly think it was a spirit from somebody else.
Okay.
I just, I never had that question asked, but now that you said it, you
Mhm.
know, I truly think it was one of my angels speaking through her.
Mm.
And it really made me think differently. Now that time I didn't, but that was not the last time.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah. So but there are, like I say, just noticing that someone may be depressed. Notice that, if someone is, an alcoholic or something, depending on what they're going through. Also, I'd say if there's ever, a situation where, I even have a 988 flyer
Hmm.
that I put out throughout the community. All the barbershops almost over here in my side of town, they have. I stopped by barbershop yesterday and they wanted some more. One barber said, "Hey, let me leave it right here." That's the thing. Understanding and having the necessary tools and resources, especially if you know someone is struggling.
Right. Listen, Scooter, Kenneth, because I'm more formal. Thank you so much, man. You are a blessing, bro. I'm proud of you for all of your accomplishments and your overtaking of those things that, were, I believe, just life's bumps,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
Not stoppages, just bumps,
Mhm.
right? And those of us who persevere those bumps, come out on the other side knowing some things
Yeah.
more than people who don't experience bumps, right?
Right. Now that's true right there.
Right. But the key is that we learn, from it. And I also want to say this. Oftentimes people ask me, like, what is the number one thing that fathers can do for their children? And it's right in line with everything that you've already talked about. It's just another word. And they'll say love. And I'm like, nah. And I was like, availability,
Mhm.
being
Yes.
available.
Yes.
Right. That's the number one thing you can do as a father for your children is to be available. And that is to make sure that your children understand that they have 1000% full access to you.
Mhm.
That's
Right.
worth more
Right.
than showing up.
Yes, yeah. And I don't know if you heard the saying, somebody said it to me not too long ago. Presence is not presence.
Right.
You
Right.
know, we show love through presence and, oh, I love them so much and this or that. But like you say, and I almost want to do a shirt that says availability equals presence.
Yes.
Because if
Absolutely.
we're not available besides a schedule,
Right.
then we're not present.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Tell
yes.
people how they can get in touch with you, where they can find out more, about the great work that you're doing with Brothers Brunch Foundation.
Hey, I appreciate it. You can find us at brothersbrunchfoundation.com, Instagram at Brothers Brunch Foundation Inc. I always joke around and say, just Google us because my son put in Kenneth Reddick one time and he had all this stuff pop up. And I'm like, that's my 8-year-old. Daddy, let me see this or that. So, hey, these days it's almost like, and somebody did the Google search the other day with Brothers Brunch. They, oh, you the first one come up. I'm like, for real? I'm like, okay. So
Mhm.
yeah, but I mean, we're on Eventbrite and everything. Uh, Especially men and dads. Please follow us. Please sign up. It's not a membership fee or anything. I just want you to be aware of everything that's going on because we never know what we might need at some point in time. And Brothers Brunch Foundation is truly here to support you along your mental health and self-care journey. And I want to thank you, Brother Kenneth, for all the work that you're doing And thank you for having me today, because this conversation here, it's been filling for me. And that's the last thing I'll say, is that the more I have the conversations and the more that I talk about it, I'm not just healing others, but I'm continuing to heal myself.
You and me in the same boat, bro. That's why I keep doing this. That's
Yes,
why I
sir.
keep doing it. Man, thank you so much. And to all of my I Am Dad podcast listeners, you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you are kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor, Art Mitchell, used to always say to me, Kenny, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Till next Sunday, have a great week. Be good to yourself, and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.
Yeah.